Hi, this is TapCat, and I have to admit, when I said I'd be continuing to cover the news for XCOM 2 War of the Chosen, it didn't necessarily mean the very next day. But when Jake Solomon speaks, I listen. And speak he did in a long interview with Dan Stapleton of IGN. So let's talk about the ways that War of the Chosen is set to shake up XCOM 2. First, just let me say that the interview with XCOM 2's creative director, Jake Solomon, was very long, and to keep these videos at a reasonable length, this one will focus primarily on the changes to the enemies we'll face, and within 24 hours, I'll do another one centered on the changes to XCOM and the Resistance. Also, if you aren't already familiar with the initial reveal, you might want to check out my initial video on the topic. There's a link in the description. Now, let's start with the Chosen because they clearly serve as our new nemesis. The big bads that you may dread seeing on a mission, but yeah, you know they're coming anyway. We don't have gameplay footage yet of the three Chosen, Hunter, Assassin, and Warlock, but each one will have individual behavior patterns on mission maps. When you first make contact with an enemy, on any mission that they're attached to, they teleport onto the other side of the map and start trying to mess with you. So the Hunter, for example, will try to snipe you all the way from across the map, and the Warlock can summon enemies right out of the ground. Now, when I first saw that, I had visions of the Hunter one-shotting one of my soldiers from way out of sight before I ever knew he was there. And I can't say I was especially excited at the idea of that kind of ultra cheap kill. But thankfully, I refrained from uninstalling XCOM 2 and rage deleting all of my videos about the game and learned it's not quite as bleak as it sounds. At least some of these things can be managed with a little effort. So for example, we'll be warned about the Hunter's shot and have the chance to get out of his line of sight. The main thrust seems to be taking you out of your comfort zone and disrupting your plans rather than inflicting maximum damage all the time. If that's really the case, then the biggest threat those abilities pose could just be costing you precious actions during time missions that could ultimately cause you to fail, but again, we'll have to see it in action. Now, one bit of news I found really surprising is that the Chosen's main goal is not to kill soldiers. What they want is to disable our troops and interrogate them in order to gain knowledge. Knowledge is an actual resource for the Chosen, and they'll use it to find the Avenger. A lot of their attacks won't do damage at all, and instead it will strike our troops with a new dazed status. And when a soldier's dazed, they can be interrogated or even captured if a teammate isn't close enough to snap them out of it before the Chosen can grab them. That's a pretty scary ability because in the short run at least, losing a soldier to capture is just as crippling as a death. And while I'll save the details for the next video, there are multiple changes in this DLC that create a need for more soldiers than we've had before. So any kind of casualties may be even more punishing than they have been. Now, we already knew that the Chosen could level up as the campaign progresses, and now it's confirmed that the new abilities and weaknesses they get as they do will be randomly assigned each campaign. But where I had thought that might make it more difficult to know what to expect, we'll actually be able to see those traits and can plan accordingly. As best I can tell, the main point of this approach is that no one strategy will work for any of the Chosen as you go from campaign to campaign. We're going to be forced to adopt new tactics to fit the version we're facing now. And by the way, if you're wondering what kind of abilities they might get access to, it looks like they'll range from borrowing some of our own, like Shadow Step, to brand new perks such as spotting any concealed units in their line of sight. Other possibilities include a chance to return fire if you miss a shot aimed at them, or going into Overwatch automatically at the end of their turn. I have no doubt that the full list is much longer than that. That's all we know for now. If you're wondering about their weaknesses, the ones revealed so far revolve around vulnerability to particular types of damage, and whether there's going to be anything more exotic waiting for us remains to be seen. Now, we already knew that to truly kill one of the Chosen, you have to invade its citadel. But it is confirmed now that each one has their own stronghold, and they'll have to be tracked down individually. In order to do that, we'll have to work with the new resistance factions, and again, I'll be covering that in more depth in the next video. But each of the Chosen will have their own territory and has their own knowledge meter, so that will help you decide who to pursue most aggressively. And we'd better chase them down because they'll be using that territory to attack the resistance, and that allows them to both reduce our income and give them more knowledge. Now that's bad enough, but once they build up enough knowledge, we can look forward to them sabotaging the Avenger and interfering with covert actions that we'll get to take. And did I mention that if a covert mission goes bad, that can lead to your soldiers getting captured? I'm not positive, but I feel like we're going to need a bigger training facility for rookies, plus the ability to recruit them in bulk just to keep up with all these captures. One more tidbit on the Chosen and their quest for knowledge, by the way. If they finally max out that meter, it triggers a special mission where they'll borrow the ion cannons from Empire Strikes Back and try to blow the Avenger into pieces so small not even Shen will be able to put it back together again. And just in case anyone's wondering, that is not a replacement to the existing Avenger defense mission. It's in addition to it. Okay, the Chosen are cool and all, but I feel like I've been talking about them longer than Dr. Valen spent lecturing us about, well, everything. So one last thing and then we're moving on. As we saw in the trailer, the Chosen will be talking to us, trash talking, taunting, and generally being obnoxious. And that extends to the strategic layer when we're back at the base. Now, this won't affect actual gameplay, but apparently the developers wanted to add a little more life to that side of the game when we are on the world map. Now personally, I never felt like XCOM 2 needed more intrusive voiceovers and wish I could turn off more of what's already there in the game. But if there's anyone who couldn't find enough trolls in YouTube comments, Twitter, online multiplayer games, and pretty much the rest of planet Earth and want to find them in XCOM, they've got you covered. Now, sarcasm aside, I do expect this to be a feature that some people will like a lot more than others. The problem with in-game dialogue is that it might be great the first time you play that content, but over multiple campaigns, it can become an annoying barrier to just playing the game. As always, I'll reserve final judgment until I see it in action. If there's one thing the reveal information for War of the Chosen made me wonder, it was how would the alien rulers fit into this new campaign structure? I mean, the idea of two sets of enemies constantly popping into missions seemed like a nightmare, even by XCOM standards. Well, we all want a stiff challenge, but we also need to keep someone alive long enough to hit Sergeant before the month of August. Well, it turns out that the roles of the rulers will be reduced, with all the ceremony usually reserved for aging movie stars whose last film tanked at the box office. Going forward, each of the three rulers will be guarding a facility, and you can either choose to go there and attack or not. That ruler will never activate unless you go to its facility. So you can control which of them you'll have to face and when it will happen. Just be aware that while they'll never show up if you don't attack it, once you do, they'll be like before, where they can pop in every couple of missions until you kill them for good. But, and this is important, they'll never appear in the same mission as the Chosen, so at least you won't have to face both at once. Another major change is that their reaction ability has been toned down a little bit. They'll still get an action when you attack or move, but reloads and other abilities like healing shouldn't trigger them anymore. And they're still hella powerful, but this should help commanders that have felt overwhelmed while trying to fight them. Moving on from the mega powerful boss types, we also got some information about the new Advent troops. We knew that the priest used psionics. Now we know they can use mind control, buff their allies, and even have a chance to put himself into stasis and then revive if killed. The Purifier is a flamethrower trooper with incendiary grenades, and that knowledge alone is going to put him very high on my priority list of which enemies to kill first when a new pod is activated. We also got some clarity about the Spectre. Now, we knew he could create dark copies of XCOM soldiers, but apparently he has to knock out one of your soldiers and then replace them with a copy. If I understand correctly, you'd kill your own soldier if you kill the copy. But if you revive your guy, then the dark copy will just immediately bite the dust. Now, if that literally means using a specialist for a revive, then Revival Protocol is probably going to show up in a lot more specialist builds, although a lot of people will be in serious mourning if they have to give up Haywire Protocol to do it. And yes, we also got quite a bit more information about the Lost. We already knew they were more or less mindless zombies drawn by the sound of combat. It turns out they're drawn specifically to the sound of explosions, so you'll have to weigh the pros and cons before lobbing another plasma grenade out there. Beyond that, they come in numbers way greater than a normal pod, so we're going to get a helping hand in the form of a new effect known as a headshot. And what that boils down to is that when you kill a Lost, that's a free action. The other significant vulnerability of the Lost is that when one is on fire, he'll panic, run, and set other Lost that he gets close to on fire. What this suggests to me is that a gunslinger with dragon rounds could be insanely effective, especially once he gets face off. And rangers with swords could also see their stock rise. But one thing you won't want to use is an incendiary grenade, because apparently we're going to get swarmed with Lost every couple of turns if they're on that map, but using a grenade shortens that timer by 1 turn. And finally, missions are going to have a new modifier known as a sitrep. This will be visible when you're choosing which missions to take, and they can change the flavor of those missions quite a bit from what we're used to. One example is a map littered with high explosives. Another is that there are Lost there. While all missions in abandoned cities will have them, apparently there's also a chance they can be on others. In fact, there's even a horde mission where all of the enemies you face will be Lost. No Advent troops or anything like that. And the one that might be most interesting to me is Surgical, where you can only bring 3 soldiers, but the number of enemies is scaled down as well. And then of course there's more, they haven't all been revealed. All right, if you're still awake, then I salute you, and if you found this video helpful, then please give it a like to help other people find it. I'll continue covering the War of the Chosen DLC until its release, so hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, including my next video focusing on how the gameplay changes will affect what we do for both XCOM and the Resistance. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. I hope we see you next time.